Okay, I think I'm sorted out. First of all, I want to say thanks very much to Oz and the team for having me along to talk today. I think it's really exciting to be presenting at a seminar such as this because I have no interest or expertise whatsoever in food or innovation or any of that sort of stuff. So my personal interest and my expertise, as Oz was saying before, is actually in the role that entertainment plays in the way in which people find out about what's happening in the world. And in particular, the political role, but also the social and cultural role that entertainment and popular media play in again, what sort of the shaping of culture. I should also point out as well that the presentation that I'm giving now, and hopefully I will keep the time, we'll see how we go, is a kind of a tight summary of a book chapter that I authored on, and including my colleague Christy Collis and Oz as well, talking about exactly this stuff. So it's forthcoming in a book co-edited by Catherine Kirkwood just there on Alternative Food Politics is the name of it. So coming soon to a bookshop near you. So for me, the reason why I start to get and started to become interested in veganism is partly because my partner is a vegan, and so I start to come into contact with these things. But it's a kind of, again, lining up with what I'm interested in is noticing that there's just more talk and more things about that make reference to vegan eating and vegan food culture. So here's Matt Preston, one of Australia's best-known food writers, saying that veganism is one of the fastest growing food movements in the world. We have again, big international publications saying vegan cuisine is moving to the mainstream and it's actually delicious. No way. McDonald's, right, apparently is at the moment just in Sweden and Finland for the moment, but I would hazard a guess that this will expand well beyond those two markets, having their own vegan burger. This is, some of you may have seen this is literally just from a couple of weeks ago. This is the CEO of Domino's Australia saying, thanks very much for loving on our experimental vegan pizza range. It was so popular that we suddenly have a massive undersupply of vegan cheese. Please stay patient. And he then also said this experiment will soon become a permanent menu item. So this is, again, about as mainstream food consumption as you can get is Domino's pizza. So clearly, vegan food culture is growing. Right? These are just a few little sort of data points along the way that tells us that the public perception, or at least the public awareness of vegan food and vegan culture is absolutely growing. And what interests me and it interests us, Christy and Oz as well, when we are doing this research is trying to understand the way in which the public perceptions of veganism are changing along the way. And it's not, there's kind of a chicken and an egg question here about, is it changing because it's popular or is it popular because the perception is changing? I think that there's both happening at the same time. These are sort of mutually reinforcing. But I think it's really important to understand what those changes are and importantly, where they're coming from. So, I'm just going to kind of sketch some of those changes. As this is a kind of a project that is ongoing and that we're learning more about all the time. But the first one is, first of all, it's not vegan. So we notice, and this is one of the things that we've tracked over time, is the way in which there has been this movement, of course, away from the term vegan to plant-based. And the change is pretty obvious as to why that's happened, right? Because let's be honest, veganism hasn't always had the best public image. It is a way in which we can redefine and define perhaps this diet away from what people don't eat to what people do eat, right? And it's a kind of way of celebrating, well, I am plant-based, and that opens up a whole bunch of options as well. But I think what's more important is the fact that we are even seeing the terms vegan and plant-based in some cases not even being used at all. Is that it's become so unremarkable as to not even require mentioning at all. So here are a couple of examples where Bosch is a a Facebook page that I follow, for example. And as I'm scrolling through my Facebook news feed, I come across videos, and there's basically no mention that it is not drawn attention to that this is plant-based food. It's just, doesn't this look spectacular? Doesn't it look beautiful? There's kind of cakes and delicious things all the time. Thug Kitchen is, for me, also a really interesting one as well. And this is another case where entertainment is intersecting with food culture, because Thug Kitchen, the cookbook, if you're not familiar with it, is really fun to read. Right? It upends and sort of subverts very much the genre of what you expect from a cookbook. A cookbook is all about perfection and so on, and of course it's not only has a lot of foul language involved, but the emphasis is not on being perfect, but just eating good food. And more interestingly is that, again, the term vegan or plant-based is hardly mentioned at all when you look at the Thug Kitchen cookbook. If you look through the introduction, I think I was paying some attention, you have to get to about paragraph 8 out of 9 in the introduction before there's any mention that there are no animal products used in any of these recipes. And this comes back to this idea that through things like this and through other kinds of entertainment that surround plant-based foods, it's a way of building bridges, and as Richard Twine calls it, it's a way of drawing omnivores or vegetarians into the central experience of vegan food, which is, I think, really quite exciting. So change number 2 is what I'm calling Meat is for Pussies. Comes straight from the name of a book by a guy called John Joseph. And I draw attention to this particular case because it's a way of upending and subverting some of the cultural connotations around meat that have to do with masculinity, which I'm sure, as we were talking about before, Matt will pick up on as well. So this idea, and of course it's very, very strong in Australia, where what it means to be Australian is to be cooking meat on the barbecue on Australia Day. And I still know people who have this strange idea that if you're feeling sick, we'll just get some more meat into you and you'll be fine. They still exist, but we have people like I said, like John Joseph, who are starting to say, what, in order to be a man, or to be masculine, or to be, for that matter, an athlete, you don't have to eat meat along the way. So here is kind of a good example of one of those people who is out there within the broader public sphere, who is changing the perception of what it means to be a plant-based, someone who is plant-based, but also someone who is a plant-based athlete. This guy here, David Carter, who's an NFL linesman, who calls himself the 300-pound vegan. The other person who is, I think, really important to pay some attention to as well is this guy here. I'm sure there's some Rich Roll fans in the audience. Rich Roll, who is himself not only a well-known kind of public figure who transformed his life through a plant-based diet and became this really well-known sort of super triathlete, but who has also become, through his podcast, a kind of really important node in the sort of plant-based public sphere, if you like. That he then becomes a kind of conduit for other guests to come on and talk about their own experiences. He'll have doctors, scientists, other athletes, et cetera, who all come onto his podcast and talk about their experiences with plant-based food. So again, someone who is also really important to pay more attention to. And change number 3 is basically it's not just about the animals. It's important there to say it's not just about the animals. It's not to say that we're not thinking about animals when it comes to plant-based diets. So more and more we are seeing plant-based eating as being at the intersection of a whole range of other concerns, and documentaries like Cowspiracy have played such an important role in getting people to think about, okay, what are the environmental consequences of animal agriculture? And I'm not suggesting that Cowspiracy or any of these texts were the sort of the first case or first time anyone even mentioned any of these things, but when they become really mainstream and they sort of pierce the consciousness of people who aren't vegans, for example, who wouldn't have necessarily paid attention to this, that's important. So forks over knives is another one that has drawn attention to the health aspects of meat consumption or animal product consumption, but also what the health as well is another one, which is the follow-up from Cowspiracy. And I wanted to just use this quote, and this comes from the research that Oz was talking about before, interviewing customers at vegetarian and vegan restaurants here in Brisbane. And there's a person being interviewed, her name is Christine, and she said, I feel like it's a lot cleaner, and I know I felt really good when I was eating that. And one of the things that I would suggest is that now, plant-based foods are making us kind of reconsider what it even means to sort of feel good in the first place. But it's not just about being good to animals, but also kind of recognizing the wider impacts that our diets have and those choices that we make day to day. So veganism is changing. So what? Well, I would argue very strongly that by understanding plant-based culture and understanding the way in which plant-based culture is seen and viewed and understood in the wider world helps us to promote its spread. Right? And there's a temptation here to sometimes look to government policy and say, well, the government should just make people not eat animal products anymore. But I've actually started to grow much more interested in this concept that's emerged out of behavioural economics called nudging. And I can talk quite a lot about it, but anyway, here's a kind of a really tight summary. Basically, there's this really good book by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein where they say nudge is any aspect of the choice architecture that alters people's behaviour in a predictable way without forbidding any options or significantly changing their economic incentives. To count as a nudge, the intervention must be easy and cheap to avoid. Nudges are not mandates. Putting the fruit at eye level counts as a nudge. Banning junk food does not. So the idea here is it's just little small interventions. It's not kind of gigantic top-down government policy that research increasingly just shows doesn't work anyway. What are the things and how can we understand the food cultures in which people operate in order to perhaps develop and good habits or sort of just nudge them towards eating the plants rather than eating the animals. So really where Oz and Christy and myself and others are starting to go with this and the thing that we're going to be exploring is just what are the nudges that will help promote some of the plant-based diets in the future. So that's it. Thanks very much.